It's hashtag Scrunchy Sunday here on Saturday Morning Crafts, and today I'm making this scrunchie. For this scrunchie, you'll need this fabric, the satin fabric from Joann's. I recommend getting a yard. You won't need a full yard, but it's always good to have it just in case because mistakes happen. And you'll need some elastic. I recommend the elastic from Hobby Lobby because it is the best bang for your buck, and you can get lots of scrunchies out of this. You'll also need a sewing machine and thread, preferably thread that matches this color because you will see a little bit of it. And you're gonna wanna pick up a bodkin. I got mine off of Amazon. They're really cheap and it'll save you a lot of time threading your elastic through your scrunchie. And that's it, let's get going. All right, so for this fabric, because it is a silkier fabric, I do like to use a larger amount rather than like a cotton fabric. I'd use a smaller amount. For this, I'll use 42 inches by 6 inches. Now this is almost the full edge of the fabric, the full width, like from salvage edge to salvage edge. So I do like working with a like fresh yard to be able to cut that full width. So you do have to make sure that it's folded over on the end, because basically you don't want to end up cutting off, like you want the full folded amount. You don't want to, when you're cutting short, when you're cutting your length, you don't want to cut off the folded half, because then you'll have two pieces of 24, or that would be about 21 inches of fabric rather than the full 42 inch. So this is folded over in half, and I will only cut to 21 inches because it is folded in half. There are a lot of different methods for sewing your scrunchie. I've tried several different ways, and this is the way that I find is the easiest. Now it's going to be a little confusing at first, but trust me, once you actually try it, it makes sense and works somehow. So you're going to start by just sewing along the edge where the two pieces come together. So we are basically making one large circle. All right, and I do go ahead and back stitch this. You technically don't have to, because we will be going in reinforcing that extra edge at the end, but I just get in the habit of doing that. So it's up to you if you want to back stitch or not, and you're just going to do a straight edge along where the two sides meet. Now this is where it gets a little crazy, so stay with me here. I'm going to lay it flat with the seam on the bottom, okay? You see the seam is on the bottom closest to my cutting mat. It's touching my cutting mat. I'm now going to fold the top part into itself, all right? Fold it over a couple of times, so that way my edges of the bottom piece, the bottom side of it, my seams can come together, all right? And that is the part that I'm going to stitch. And I'm going to make sure this tube that we've made down below with the top side of it, make sure that doesn't come through, okay? Because we're going to be stitching along this edge, and it's gonna wanna kind of pop up into there. Now, all you're going to do, this is kind of where it gets like, kind of like a magic trick. What you're gonna do is you're going to just sew along that edge, and you're gonna keep sewing, and you're gonna pull the fabric through. This is going to be one long stitch, one long line that is going to go around almost the entire length of the fabric. And as I'm sewing, you kind of see me pulling a little bit at the fabric at the bottom. That is me pulling that center tube through. So I'm not touching the outside part, the side that we're actually sewing together. I'm pulling that tube of fabric through, okay? Now, like I said, when I first learned how to do this, I was like, this makes no sense. But once you actually start, it works. It makes sense once you have once you have your hands on doing it. So when you are pulling the fabric, however, when you're sliding it through, when you're guiding it to get more fabric to sew, I like to hold the area that has already gone through my sewing machine, I like to hold back there, kind of hold the sewn part. So here you see that tube right there, okay? That tube is what we're gonna be pulling through down at the bottom right there. And so you can kind of see it kind of starts to gather up. That's why I like to hold on to that part that's already gone through the sewing machine, hold on to the sewn edge to kind of help that fabric stop to gather and actually feed through, because it kind of gets like hooked on itself. Another thing to remember with this is to always do this with the foot down and your needle down. And also don't be tugging a whole lot, because you obviously could break your needle in the process. We don't want to do that. So just gently playing with the fabric, gently pulling the fabric through rather than forcing anything, okay? We don't want to force it. Now for the stitch itself, I'm just using a straight stitch, nothing too complicated. Don't worry about the amount of seam allowance that you have, really. This is all going to be tucked inside your scrunchie. So you're not going to see this stitch. It will be folded over. Just, you know, don't have a huge seam allowance. Don't leave a huge amount of seam there, just because then you're going to lose some width to your scrunchie if you do that. Also, a reminder from earlier, you are sewing the basically you're sewing on the back side of the fabric. So this is not the shiny side. The shiny side is what's inside. We are going to be sewing almost the full length of the fabric. We will stop when we have about an inch or two gap in the fabric, and that is to be able to pull the tube right side out and to feed the elastic through. So we don't want to sew it fully closed, and we want to be sewing on the back side of the fabric, okay? We're sewing the two back sides closed. So the inside, the touching side of the fabric is the, you know, nice satiny finish side of the fabric, the shiny side of the fabric. Also, you're going to want to keep making sure as you're sewing that that tube doesn't try to come into where you're sewing, okay? I've done that before. Once you're at this stage, it probably won't do it anymore, because the tube has really formed that what's in the tube right now has already been sewn, so it's not going to try to get in there. But just keep in mind as you're going to keep pushing the tube in, pushing in that fabric, so that the only two pieces that you're sewing together are the outside part, okay? And also, so you can kind of see that here. So that right there is where I started. I've already looped around back to the starting point. I do like to check that periodically as I get to the end, because it is kind of deceptive in where it's at. Sometimes I feel like, oh, I'm already there, and then I check and I have like 6 more inches to go. So just keep in mind where that's at, and you don't want it to sneak up on you as well, because then you don't want to end up with like a 1/2 inch to work with, okay? One more thing with this stitch, you will want to back stitch at the beginning and at the end, because we will be messing with the seam. You know, we will be pulling things through right there, and you don't want your stitch to start to kind of unravel right there. Now, of course, clean up any threads, and then now this is where we will pull our tube through and just pull it all through that little hole right there. And you will see what we're left with is one long, instead of a circle now, it's a full tube, okay? Next up is the elastic. Now you can go a lot of different routes with the elastic. You can get a thinner braided elastic that you can actually just knot to close together. You can go with an even thicker fabric than what I have here. Here is a 1/2 inch by 2 yards. So it's a 1/2 inch thick or wide rather. And this is a braided one. I like the braided better, but really it's whatever you prefer. elastic wise. The thinner elastics are going to lose the elasticity a little bit more. So if you have like really thick hair, like I have thick hair, this is the way to go if you have thick hair, because it'll hold the elastic a lot longer. Now we are going to use 7 inches for this size of fabric. This is kind of what I find works best for me. You can add an inch or take away an inch depending on the amount of hair you have. So now I'm going to start with my bodkin and I'm going to attach it to the elastic. Now you could use like a large safety pin instead to feed this through, or there's a few other different things that you can do. I like to use the bodkin just because it's easy. The one thing is, do not let go of the tail of the elastic. I've done that. I did it on this video prior to what you're seeing right now. So it's really frustrating when you get all the way to the end and you pull the bodkin through, you finally made it, and then you lose the end of the elastic. So you don't want to do that. Something that I've done before has been to pin the end of the elastic to the edge of the fabric. I don't like doing that when it's satin, just because I don't want to poke another hole into it, but that is something that you could definitely do. And so also sometimes with the bodkin and with any other method that you're using for this, we are working with a large amount of fabric, so it does take a little finagling to get it to feed all the way through, to get the bodkin to come all the way through. And see, this is the area that I always end up losing the elastic on. So because I'm really working with the fabric, trying to get it all the way through. Now for stitching the elastic closed. This is the part that I hate the most about making scrunchies, at least with the elastic that I use. And this is just because it's my personal preference to use this thicker elastic. If you were using a thinner one, like I mentioned, you could just tie like a double knot, double, triple knot, and that's fine. It's not going to come loose. What I also have done before is hand stitch it closed. That's a little bit easier, especially when you're working with like a cotton fabric that doesn't give you as much room to get that elastic into your sewing machine. This one I struggled with, I had to fight with it for a little bit to pull it out of the way and not lose the positioning of the elastic, because you also still could, you could let go and it could fall back through. But I was able to make it work for this one. So for the stitch for this, I like doing like a zigzag stitch just to give me a little bit more reinforcement when it comes to the elastic, just so it doesn't come loose at all. Then of course, like always, you're gonna wanna cut off your excess thread. And now we have this little edge left. So this, if you were making them, you could, if you wanted to add like your own personal little tag, you could do it there. That would be a great spot for it. But you're just going to kind of fold the edges over to create that seam, and then we're gonna stitch along that edge just to close it. All right, this is where it's important to have a matching thread, that way you don't see it. And also, this is also where it's important to not have a super large gap. You don't want like a 5-inch gap, then you're gonna see the stitch on it, the entire 5 inches. So your gap needs to be a small enough amount that you can, that you won't have a huge seam showing, and a large enough amount that you can still work with and feed that elastic through and sew that elastic, most importantly. Once more, we're gonna cut off our threads, of course, and then from here, you have a scrunchie. I like to fluff it out. You could fold it or move it to where the seam is on the inside if you don't want to see that invisible seam. If you don't want to see, where the two pieces are, you can push the fabric through or move the fabric around so that that's on the inside part. But I kind of like the look of it. And there you have it. You have your very own scrunchie. Thanks for joining me for today's #Scrunchy Sunday. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe, hit all the buttons if you haven't already. And if you want to learn how to make your very own pair of Winnie the Pooh ears, be sure to check out my last video. And be sure to join me next Sunday for the next #Scrunchy Sunday. I will see you there.